Yo, how's it going? I wanted to go through and I know a lot of people are just now getting into the game, and I know people say, "Oh man, I really like the game, but I don't know how to get into it. Where do you start? There's all these different decks." And I'm here to tell you that in general, best place to start, as always with most card games, is with the starter deck. And something unique to Final Fantasy actually is that the starter decks actually function as like a hybrid between what like a Yu-Gi-Oh structure deck does and a starter deck. They're meant to be relatively easy to pick up and play with a lot of kind of basic cards, but also starter decks have exclusive cards, and those exclusive cards often form the backbone of very competitive decks. So I'm going to kind of go through a series. We're going to go through the last couple of starter decks. I'm going to do at least Retainers, Guardians, and I can look at Avalanche and Turks as well if people are still interested by then. And I'm going to show you a way to, with just the starter deck and less than $25 in singles, I'm going to transform that starter deck into a deck that you'd be proud to take to locals. So right here, I'm going to take a look. We're going to start off by looking at the stock retainers list. And there's a lot of things to like here. Noctis is an incredibly powerful card, especially, and I think he pairs very well with the Gladiolus and the Prompto from the set, in that they become 2 CP nukes as long as Noctis can stick to the field for a little bit. Ignis is a similarly powerful card, but he's kind of a strange hybrid of like a storm payload. It's a lot harder to justify, 4 CP for Noctis and then 4 CP for Ignis on the same turn. But in general, I think there's a lot to like in this deck, and I think there's a way that you could take this kind of general core and transition it to a very strong Earth Wind control list by not spending a lot of money. So let's go ahead. So as is with a lot of these starter decks, there's a lot of cards just aren't any good. This Chocobo forward isn't really doing anything in the deck. This core forward's no good. We don't really need 3 copies of Iris. We have way too many copies of Ignis and Gladio, and there's 2 other Noctises, which is really frustrating because we can get locked out of playing the best card in the deck. Our summons, like this Sylph, is just horrendous in every way. There's so much better we can do with a lot of these cards. So let's go ahead, let's see what I did to upgrade this deck. Alright, so we went to a lot more different cards. We're going to kind of go card by card. First things first, I kept the 3 Prompto, 3 Noctis, 3 Starter Gladio, and then the 2 Ignises from the starter deck. I did not play the starter Ignis since it doesn't really pair that well with the deck. This Ignis is in here mainly because he's an EX burst with a solid effect that can get you your Noctis if you don't have access to it yet. Also, I wanted to kind of have the high roll potential for Prompto just because. But the first big thing we upgraded was we upgraded our backup engine a lot. So if you go to the stock retainers list, our backups are fine, but like our backup engine is only the 2 copies of Claris into the 3 Regis. There's no secondary Claris target. Cindy's fantastic, but she can only do so much in this list. Again, this Thief and the Selkie are fine cards, but they're not really going to find each other. So what did we do instead? So I cut down to 1 copy of Regis. I still wanted to keep the King package, especially because Kolka is such a good card when paired with a copy of Norstalin. Kolka, of course, lets us search any Earth forward, so this is also just a copy of Noctis, and this gives us an Earth and a Wind backup off of just a single Norstalin. 1 copy of Lael and 1 copy of Waltrill. You can cut the Waltrill if you wanted to for another Selkie or like a second Matoya or second Regis, but I kind of like him as a hand fixer, especially when we're in such a budget list. Being able to kind of get a second mulligan in a way is just very powerful. So just we went for we get 2 copies of Shantoto in here, probably one of the more expensive cards in the list, along with the 1 copy of Matoya. It kind of gives access to board wipes if we fall behind. This deck does want to get some backups down early, so having access to this in those aggro matchups that you just sometimes can't keep up with is going to be nice. For forwards, again, I mentioned we're on the same set of retainers. These retainers, the Prompto, the Gladiolus, 2 Ignis, and the 3 Noctis. But we've completely revamped it. I thought that probably the best budget card to build an Earth deck around is going to be Durando. So if you haven't read Durando, when he deals damage to an opponent, you get both a forward and a backup from your break zone back to hand, which is incredibly powerful. And one thing that's really nice about Noctis in particular is Noctis is very good at clearing the way for Durando to swing in, recur you your resources, and allow you to continue to pop off. And then Durando can continue to feed Noctis by giving Noctis a steady stream of forwards to play to the field to proc the Durando. It's a very powerful loop that I think has a lot of merits in a list like this. Again, we're kind of trying to use a relatively cheap card to accomplish what big decks are doing. In this case, Durando is an engine. You can crank this guy out turn 1 if you want to, and it's very powerful. It forces your opponent to deal with them almost immediately. Noctis is very fortunate. He's a good source of removal. You could splurge for a copy of Typhon or two. I chose not to, just because this list is a little heavier on Earth, and Earth backups in particular. So he's very rarely going to be a forward for the 2-for-1, and he's like a $3 card, so I was kind of running up against my budget a little bit. For other forwards, we have one copy of Prish to help deal with any weird monster matchups. We have 2 copies of Scarmiglione, or 1 copy of Scarmiglione, 1 copy of Duke Snakeheart, and 2 copies of Mid. So these serve a very interesting purpose. Because we're relatively low on removal summons that we can have access to, these sort of function as removal as long as we have our Noctis on field. And we have 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 ways to Noctis. It should be relatively easy to find a Noctis at some point, but because these have back attack, you can cast these on your opponent's turn to have Noctis also ping for their power. So Duke Snakeheart becomes a 2 CP 5k that also kills something when he blocks. Scarmiglione is very funny because he doubles the damage on the turn he comes in, so he actually hits for 6k, and then he also has first strike. So he basically kind of, if your opponent swings in, can punch as almost like a 12k on a 2 CP body, which is very funny. And then Mid is very nice, which uses both protection for Noctis and a 7k ping off of him. 1 copy of some power 1-ofs. We have 1 Zidane. Kind of a high roll card. You're very rarely going to get the haste on him, but sometimes when you're playing a budget list, I really feel that these high roll cards can sometimes make up the difference in value between your deck and your opponent's. 1 copy of Null, a little strange in this list because you don't necessarily want to be using it for your Noctis ping every turn. But if you start falling behind, the combination of like Null Durando is very obnoxious for anybody to deal with it once you hit damage 3. 1 copy of Ishtola just to cancel anything that might come your way. Again, these are all recurable because we do have 3 copies of Kusith. This was thankfully reprinted in the anniversary box. 2 copies of Arciela. There's 7 summons in this list, but you also can use her to use your opponent's summons. And she pairs very well with Noctis. Being able to make anything significantly bigger means that you can fire it at will to make Noctis kind of have that extra little oomph that he sometimes might be missing. She also does a very good job of protecting Noctis and your Durando. Lastly, I think rounding up the forward count, we have 1 copy of Garda, Lady of the Vortex. There's no monsters in the list. I did go for 7 summons. I have 2 1 CP Chocobo. Because this list is a little bit lower budget, I was trying to find good EX burst summons, and unfortunately in Earth and Wind there's not a ton of great ones. Chocobo can kind of just help you dig for whatever you might need on your future stuff, which I think is pretty powerful. 3 copies of Kusith. This helps us basically kind of get up to 6 copies of Noctis if we need it. And lastly, we have 3 copies of Titan to kind of help protect our board and maybe deal with a big problem card if we need to. So that's the list. I'm going to put the list in the description down below. But I went and built this on TCG Player, so not even buying singles from the Noctis and Arden Starter deck, buying the box itself for $24 in TCG Player, and going through and buying the rest of the cards I need. My cart comes out to be $46.53. So my upgrades, we go ahead and just remove the Noctis and Starter deck. $22, and I think we took this from a list that has potential to a list that I think you could do pretty well at locals with, all things considered. I think if you wanted to take this list in a more powerful direction, let me pull this back up. I would maybe start splurging for a copy or 2 of Ishtola, or not Ishtola, of Althea. to potentially protect your Noctis, make him a little harder to interact with. Shadow Lord would be a very nice card for the deck that I just don't have access to in the budget. He's about a $6 card, and I was trying to keep everything under 25. So let me know what you think of the list. If there's anything you'd want to do, I can potentially look into. I know I can make this for Guardians at least. I can look into Avalanche, Turks. I don't know that Captains is really buildable on a super slim budget, but I can certainly look into that as well. So let me know what you think, and I will see y'all next time.